New year, new focus, new background, new intro. Tap into the psychology of engagement and more. This is where we talk about life, learning, and everything in between. This is the Lifelong Podcast, a show for those of you who love to ask why. It's because we're marketers. It's because we're coaches. It's because we're change makers. Each week, we dive into the big questions and explore the psychology of engagement with strategies, tactics, and special guests along the way. Now, here's your guide, the visibility hacking queen herself, Coach Molly. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this episode of the Lifelong Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Molly from visibilityhacking.com, and boy, oh boy, am I excited for this new year and everything that we have planned to share with you on the podcast. So you're going to see a few different changes, and for those of you listening in podcast format, you're going to hear a few different changes. So you already checked out our brand new intro. I think it's pretty cool, and it speaks a lot more specifically to what we're getting at this season. So this year, we are diving into the psychology of engagement. So I used to spend time in university popping people into MRI scanners and looking at their brains. Well, we gave them different images to look at and different videos to look at, and we told them stories in different ways, and we had them read things, and we looked at what their brains were doing as we did this. And for so long, I've forgotten about that work that I did, and I thought, hey, 2021, let's bring it out. Let's dust off the research and let's talk about engagement. Let's talk about what's actually going on in our brains. So this, my friends, is psychology for marketers. 2021 is going to be an incredible year. In 2020, we grew so much, not only in the podcast format, but our business behind the scenes just absolutely exploded in a way that I didn't think was ever possible. At the beginning of 2020, we were planning a completely different year. We were planning a slow growth, side hustle type situation, working one-on-one with our clients, and then March happened. I had just wrapped up a few weeks in Costa Rica, some relaxing, some prepping, some planning, and I literally got the last flight out of Costa Rica back to Canada. And that's when everything changed. And then we got sent home, and everything went into lockdown, and everyone started working from home, and it slowly became this. Well, it didn't slowly happen. It happened quite quickly, where we all just ended up working from home and we had to figure out how this works. And so for 2020, I became focused on how do we communicate? How do we use the technology that's around us to replicate those in-person experiences? But by the end of 2020, I realized that it wasn't about replicating the in-person experiences. Instead, it was about understanding that there's so many more layers to that. So with the technology we have around us, we can replicate those in-person experiences. We can still have those person-to-person communications. With video, we can check in on people's body language. We can look at facial expressions. We can get a little bit more than just an email communication back and forth. But I like to think bigger. So I realized while I was examining these layers of ways that we're engaging with our technology, engaging with each other through that technology, I realized that there was something so much bigger happening. The possibility, it gets me really excited. So let me explain this. So we have, a lot of us are trying to focus on using technology, recreating those in-person experiences. But what we're failing to do is realizing that we can make those experiences of connection so much more rich by engaging with our technology. So we have to move past just trying to recreate what we used to have, quote unquote, and look at what we can have. Because in 2021, my prediction is that we're going to, at some point, get back to working together in person, face to face. But we shouldn't ever forget what we have learned in 2020. So my hope for 2021 is that we not only are able to more comfortably bring more people into the digital world in a way that is comfortable and accessible to them. And that means, from an educational perspective, making sure that all of our students have devices and high-speed internet infrastructure that will get them online. I want to see people talking about that wicked and wild problem. And I'm not just talking about children as students. I'm talking about adults who are pursuing further education. So many people were laid off from their jobs and are now looking to retrain into new industries with new skills. So I used to work with this amazing group of students from all across Canada. We were studying adult education, and some of the peers I got along with the best actually they lived in really northern communities, really rural areas, where actually when the wind blows too strong or when the temperature drops too low or when there's a snowstorm, their internet gets cut out. So that led me to thinking about how can we make the best? This is like 2017, 2018, right? How can we make the best of that learning experience for those people who do not have that big city high-speed internet, right? If we want to advance our population, we need to also take into account the back end of that. We need to make sure that we are growing together and we're not just pursuing innovation at the expense of those who don't have access to those newer technologies. So I started asking myself, how does this look in terms of delivering educational content? So we have to look at synchronous learning and we have to look at asynchronous learning. We have to look at people. Synchronous learning is when people are together in that same space at the same time. Doesn't necessarily mean physical space, but they're able to watch that same lecture at the same time. They're able to engage in the chat on a YouTube video, for example. They're able to interact with that exceptional coach who's sharing their knowledge in a Facebook Live, for example. That's synchronous learning. The other kind is asynchronous learning, and that's what a lot of distance learning used to be. Before we had the wonderful world of the internet, distance learning, in my case at least, was literal booklets, like workbooks, like you used to do in the early years of elementary school, right? Filling out these booklets and then you mail the booklet back. And like, I remember in high school, I was trying to finish high school as fast as I could. I didn't have a very good time in high school. And so I was I ended up in an alternative school, but at this point I was looking for distance learning so I could get more credits done each semester. And I came upon what I think it's still around, called the ILC, the Independent Learning Center. And it was here in Toronto, and it was run in part by TV Ontario, which would be our provincial broadcast network. And I would fill out these booklets and I would mail them back. And I felt so disconnected from my course materials. There would be weeks on end between sending and receiving the next package, between finishing an assignment and getting the feedback. But that's the way we did it. It was about finding that responsibility as a learner to go back and remember what we had learned and to take really good notes and to review them. So that takes a level of discipline, though. So now we fast forward, everything's online. I just graduated in 2020 as well, but I'd been in school doing adult education and pursuing that as my graduate schoolwork, and I was able to do it online. And it was beautiful to see how, yes, there was times where we had to be synchronous. We had to be online at the same time, those beautiful lectures that our teachers would give. But it was amazing because that's where this class that I was taking, where these students were in these northern communities, and we were having this discussion with the teacher saying, we need to change the format of this class because synchronous learning isn't working for like 50% of the class. And it was neat because the teacher she was a huge, huge tech fan. So she was like, okay, let's figure out how we can do this better. And that changed it for me, guys. Absolutely changed it. Looking at how we can recreate those synchronous learning environments for those students who may not be able to make it on time. And I'm not just talking about students in school, and I'm not just talking about formal education in terms of university courses and graduate school. I'm talking to you marketers, coaches, consultants, people who need to be able to transmit and share their knowledge and education with people, but in a way that isn't as formalized as we're used to in the education system. So this year, 2021, on the Lifelong Podcast, we are breaking all of those stereotypes. We're blowing down the walls. We're radically changing the way that we communicate with people, the way that we teach people, the way that we think about teaching people, and the way that we think about communicating with each other. So 2021 on the Lifelong Podcast, you're going to see a lot of changes. Our Saturday episodes are going to be heavily focused on the psychology of engagement. In some cases, it will be a psychology 101, but it's definitely geared to be psychology for marketers. How do we, as people who are trying to transmit our message, how do we make sure that we're getting it to the right people, that we're sharing that information in the most effective and impactful way possible? And then on Thursdays, as usual, we're going to have our conversation episodes, but they're going to look a little bit different. You're going to meet some really, really interesting people. Digital marketers who are making incredible impacts. Coaches who are changing the lives of not only their students, but the communities and the families in which they serve. You're going to meet people who are just so deeply passionate about specific subjects that I just love to chat with people who have that deep passion about things. And we're going to try and unlock what makes us so passionate about stuff. How do we use technology to connect with our people in a way that's not 1999? So let's move forward together into 2021 with our heads held high, our brains intact, and an excitement for what can come. 2020 was a really hard year for people. It was tough. The world drastically changed, and really quickly. And for a lot of the year, we were left not knowing what's going to happen around the next corner. That anxiety and that not knowing can be really, really detrimental to the way that we learn as humans. So let's talk about what's actually going on in our brains. Let's talk about how we can have an impact as marketers and as coaches and as people who genuinely want to change the world by empowering our people with the tools they need to do whatever it is you do. Build strong families. Whether or not you're there to build strong businesses, whether or not you're there to empower people to eat better or to sleep more, it doesn't matter. But what matters most is that 2021 is the year that we change everything. 2020, the world shook, everything fell down, and those of us who have been listening to this podcast throughout 2020, and those of you who came to the Mindset and Impact Summit, those of you who are visibility hackers, you know that you have established yourself. You have planted your feet in 2020. The rocks have fallen around you, and 2021 is the year that we clean house, we move that debris out of the way, and we shine in our glory. Oh, I can't wait, my friends. 2021 is going to be our year. So thank you for so much for listening to this episode. I will see you again in our next episode. And until then, remember, I love you and be excellent to each other.